Hey there. Can you see
Hello,
me
sorry, I was
okay?
muted. I can see you, and I just added a spotlight to you as well. So now everyone can see us. It's wonderful. We're just going to wait a minute or two as people come into the meeting, then we'll get started.
Sure.
Sounds good.
I'm still waiting for my special NSSA coffee cup.
I did bring that up in our last meeting, and it's on our highest order of business right now because we're. No,
I'm joking.
I know. We were thinking about it though, because it's not a bad idea since we're encouraging so much coffee drinking.
So to say this, I created that logo, or not the logo was created by a professional thing, and I borrowed a friend's coffee mug and put it on there. So that's the only thing in existence is that.
It looks like a real coffee cup, and I want one.
Well, we'll work on it.
Okay, I'm going to be a real East Coaster today and get us started right now. I can't wait longer than one after at this point. So, hello everybody. Let's get started with this. Welcome to the Neutron Café, the Director's Cut, brought to you by the Neutron Scattering Society of America. My name is Claire Saunders, and I am a PhD candidate at Caltech in Pasadena, California. And over the next hour, I'm going to be your host. So believe it or not, the idea for this sit down came from Star Trek. And I'll have to admit it here, I am a huge Star Trek fan. It goes back to when I dragged my whole family to a Star Trek convention in Parsippany, New Jersey to meet Leonard Nimoy when I was 16. But that aside, a few months ago, there are rumbles that they were going to be releasing a 4K version of Star Trek the Motion Picture Director's Cut. And I thought it'd be a great idea, hearing about that, to sit down and talk with some real directors who really help lead the direction of neutron science. And so here we are. So before I introduce our directors, we're going to be taking questions throughout this hour. Submit them through the chat, through the Google Forms that we sent out. You could do it on Facebook as well if you're tuning in from there. And we're going to do our best to answer all of your questions. So with that said, I am thrilled to introduce our directors today. So we have Ken Andersen. Ken is the Associate Lab Director for Neutron Sciences at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and Rob Dimeo. Rob is the Director of the National Institute of Standards and Technology Center for Neutron Research, also called NCNR. So Ken, Rob, thank you for being willing to sit down and talk with me today about neutrons.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yes, pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So where are you both calling in from today?
I'm in Gaithersburg, Maryland, from my office in NCNR.
And I'm sitting in my office up at the Spallation Neutron Source, looking out over the rainy landscape here in Tennessee.
I was just going to ask if you were in the path of Tropical Storm Fred right now.
Yeah.
Yes. So the question I always like to really start off with people is how they got into neutron sciences. Like my gateway to neutrons was my first internship at the SNS way back in 2012. So how did both of you get into neutrons and neutron scattering?
Okay, do you want to start, Rob?
Sure. Well, I was a graduate student at Penn State, and as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do for my PhD, one of the relatively new faculty members there at Penn State was Paul Sokol, and he was advertising for graduate students to join his research group to do experiments in neutron scattering. So I ended up talking to him a bit, and he brought me on board, and I did a research associateship with him, got my PhD there, and actually while I was a graduate student on one of my first experiments, that's where I met, when I met Ken Andersen. I was over at the ILL doing an experiment on IN-10. It was I don't know if you remember, Ken, it was 97 or 98, I think. And you were an instrument scientist, I think, on D7, maybe?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. He was one of the first instrument scientists that I met. Another one was a gentleman by the name of Mark Adams at ISIS. He was at the time, the IRIS instrument scientist. And the thing that actually got me into the business of neutron scattering was learning from instrument scientists like Ken and Mark Adams. I got bit by this bug, seeing how enthusiastic somebody like Mark Adams was for service and support of science. And I think that's been generally the theme of my career since then. And I really have enjoyed being in neutron scattering since then. So that's how I got into the business anyway.
Okay, well, so thank you for that introduction, Rob, to me as well. I think for me it was a bit random, actually. When I was a student, we had a professor who moved to my university. I was at Keele University in the UK. This was Bill Sterling, who used to be an instrument scientist at the ILL. He eventually became director of the ILL, but at the time he just moved to Keele as a professor. And he gave a talk, and this was in the good old days of, acetate slides. And he put this slide down in the solid state physics course. Before he even started telling us anything about solid state physics, with a picture of Grenoble and the Alps in the background and the ILL reactor in the foreground. And he said, if you do well, and you come and do a PhD with me next year, this is where you'll be going. And I was sitting there thinking, wow, that looks cool. I can move to France. I can learn to ski. I can drink red wine,
That does sound really appealing.
Yeah. So at the time, that was actually the what made that kind of random decision, The other thing I was thinking of going into at the time was fusion. Sounded really exciting. But in hindsight, I'm very glad I made the decision and moved into neutrons, even though it was kind of random at the time. So I did my PhD at the ILL. I'm somebody who likes kind of hands-on experimenting, and I really got into that in my PhD, and then when I continued I did a postdoc in Japan at the KEK. They had a very small spallation neutron source there at the time, and that was kind of a build-it-yourself neutron spectrometer facility. If you wanted to get to your detector, you had to unstack a bunch of fueling with your hands, and bags of B4C powder and stuff, and then you got the detector out and you played with the discriminator levels or whatever, and you put it back in again, and every time you moved something around, it measured things slightly differently, so it was totally irreproducible and unpublishable. But it was great fun, and I learned so much about how to do measurements and the importance of doing things in a reproducible way.
And so the sources you guys are both talking about, I know I've been really spoiled coming up since my whole career has been with SNS, and so I'm used to 1.4 megawatt kind of situation where what was it like when you guys were during your PhDs, when you're working with neutrons? What kind of statistics did you have? What did it really look like at that point?
Well, I mean, I did experiments for my PhD. I did experiments at the ILL and at ISIS, which were both pretty well established places at the time. Well, ILL was very well established. ISIS was newer, but both of them were kind of high-end facilities. They weren't the kind of facilities where you went in and unstacked the shielding with your hands and kind of hoped for the best. They were. I mean, so I didn't have as much scope for going in there and messing around with instruments like I did later on in my postdoc. I got a head start because I had a very good supervisor, who wrote the first proposal beam time for me, which was at the ILL on Iron 6, an old time of flight spectrometer, and I ended up basically recalibrating the instrument because it turned out to not be well enough calibrated for a high precision measurement like we needed to do. And that was right up my street. I was always interested in the science, but I was also equally, perhaps not more interested in the instrumentation aspect.
Okay. Rob, how about you?
Yeah, so my experience, I think, was similar to Ken's. The experiments that I would do with Paul were also at some of the flagship facilities like the ILL, ISIS, and coming down to NIST as well. I made quite a few trips down to NIST, and that's where I got to know what NIST was about and got very interested in working here. But during that time, I was really a user. So my responsibilities were less on doing anything really with the instrument other than controlling it with the instrument control software, and more on filling the cryostat, making sure that it was operating properly, setting up the runs, doing online data analysis, that sort of thing, or on the fly data analysis. But I really didn't start getting my hands dirty until I got, my first dream job, which was to be an instrument scientist in a major neutron facility. And so then I had this job here at NIST working on a newly commissioned backscattering spectrometer. It was designed by a number of people, but leading that was Dan Newman. And he had this, he implemented this really cool idea that had been formulated overseas, but not successfully implemented in an instrument called a phase-space transform chopper. And it was beautiful in the sense that it provided a lot higher flux for this inherently low flux technique, but it also caused a lot of background. And so my hands got dirty doing lots of shielding and things like that, post-commissioning, and making sure we could get it signal to background reasonable and things like that. So I had a lot of fun doing that type of thing. I didn't go nearly as far into the instrument design and development during my career as Ken did. I mean, he's had quite a fascinating career and experience with that. But that's how I ended up, getting here to NIST, and that was my experience at the major facilities. So
I see an underlying trend here of the importance of actually being at these user facilities to do experiments, and the recent pandemic has forced us to do a transition to these remote experiments. How important do you guys think it is for people coming up in neutron scattering to physically go to these facilities and do experiments there?
I think it's tremendously important. I mean, I would not have got involved in neutron scattering the way that I have if I'd started out my career in the conditions which exist right now. We're doing everything we can to make it possible for people to come back on site and start doing experiments hands-on again. I mean, we're doing the best we can under the circumstances, but I think it's absolutely essential, and I think it must be a really tough time to be starting out your career at the moment, not being able to get your hands dirty, not being able to meet people face to face, not being able to get those kind of informal contacts, and I think the majority of what you learn is not from kind of training courses and the official ways. It's just talking to people and doing stuff. And when both those things are severely curtailed as they are right now, that's really tough.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything Ken said. I would offer, there's a couple different ways to look at the impact of the pandemic on the user facility operations like at Oak Ridge and NCNR. And one of those is from the educational aspect that Ken alluded to. You learn a lot when you're a user coming to the facility. I mean, I have great memories going to the facilities and learning from the instrument scientists, from the other experimenters, users who were there, the senior staff. But the other aspect of that too is experiments are not that easy to carry out these days, those that are at the leading edge. They require complex sample environments, a lot of attention, and expert knowledge of the samples, and who better than the users to provide that kind of attention. And so I think all of the facilities have been doing the best we can to support users during this time when they haven't been able to visit the facilities and do the experiments locally. But we're limited in what we can do because of that, because we don't have that expertise coming to the facilities. We don't have that ability necessarily for them to run the sample environments that they're experts in. We have we have expertise at the facilities in different sample environments, but there's a great benefit to having the users coming to do the experiments.
And
yeah, I really got into, sorry.
No, bad, you first.
I really got into cryogenics when I was a PhD student. Rob and I were both working with liquid helium for our PhD, and you have to know how an orange cryostat works. Preferably, you have to know how a helium-free fridge or even a dilution fridge works. You have to understand kind of gas handling panels and be able to calculate, the ideal gas law for how to fill the liquid into the sample in the right way. And I think that's those are tremendously useful skills to have to operate that kind of equipment. And you can't do that if you're not there in person. Somebody else does it for you, right? And you end up seeing things in a much more theoretical way.
Do you think there's a place for these remote experiments? Do you see a place where we could continue doing this after the pandemic?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I really want us to go back to doing that again. I mean, we've learned a lot about what you can do remotely, and we should be making good use of that, what we have learned about that. But I really would like to see the default mode of operation going back to much closer to what we were doing in the past.
Yeah, and I would 100% agree with that. I think there is, we have learned a lot about what we can and can't do with remote operations. And we've been getting questions, what would it take for you to become much more of a remote operation user facility? And frankly, the answer is, it's a different staffing model. What we have definitely seen during the pandemic is this has a significant impact on the instrument scientists who are supporting these experiments, because frankly, we were used to operating with users coming and carrying out much of the experiments. And so, like I said, it's a different staffing model that would be required for this.
And it would be a difficult staffing model to put in place, because I mean, all instrument scientists, they start out as users, right, as students or postdocs in some way. And so you realize that you enjoy doing this and you want to pursue this as a career because you have been there doing experiments hands-on. If you don't have that experience, long term, where are we going to get our instrument scientists from? I don't know.
So we have a question from the audience that relates to this point. So if the pandemic persists and continues indefinitely, are there plans at both facilities to provide virtual tours for new users, like especially grad students? And the way I see this is almost like a VR experience in some way, where you could conduct your experiment, just put on an Oculus and go for it.
Yeah, I think that's certainly worth considering. I mean, actually, from a practical point of view, since we're a fenced-in laboratory, like Oak Ridge is a fenced-in laboratory, any opportunity you have to show the outside world what it is that you're doing inside is great. So this goes above and beyond pandemic conditions. But yeah, I mean, during the pandemic, we've had to curtail tours of the facility. Also, from a practical perspective, we've done virtual tours for contracts that need to be let. When we have to show potential contractors on industry day, for example, different parts of the facility, this is where we need some work done, et cetera. So we've done those sorts of things, but doing that for an outreach is an interesting idea, and that could be useful.
Yeah, I like the idea. I mean, at the moment, what we're doing is we're producing kind of short video clips. Here's a clip on the SNS accelerator, or here's a clip on the second target station, or science at Haifa, or doing experiments at Haifa, and that's kind of a virtual tour, but not really. Going to an actual virtual tour, creating a 3D environment that you could explore. I imagine that's what you're thinking of. We haven't done that, but it's a good idea.
Ken, we actually do have a VR tour. I just posted the link in the chat.
Oh, Thomas.
The SNS does
Fantastic.
have one. And I'm trying to find the link for the Haifa tour. I'm not sure if it's public yet. I know that I know the people that worked on making this work, and we used it for the SAGE camp, which was an outreach for women at the high school age where multiple national labs work together. We have a tour of our computing center as well. I can find the link for all the ORNL tours and put it in the chat. It's pretty new, it's pretty cool, and if you have a VR headset, you can do exactly what Claire wants to do. You can put it on. Now, you still need somebody explaining it to you, right? So if you could combine this with an actual tour, and that's what we done with the kids in the camp, where somebody would basically share their screen, but other people could explore and take you through it, just like you would in I still prefer real people tours, but this isn't bad if you can't come here. And so this is a fun thing to play with.
Brilliant. I'm so glad you were here to put me right, Thomas. Thank you.
That's my job, right?
And Thomas actually gave me a great segue into outreach and asking about that. So what are your plans as directors for outreach efforts and promoting diversity in neutron sciences? At the recent meeting we just had, the SHREC meeting, it was brought up that we do have to put a lot of effort towards making our community more diverse than it currently is. And do you have specific ways that you're going to tackle this?
Well, I mean, I see the primary place where really I have direct influence is less on the user community and more on the staff within my own organization. We have a long way to go. We are not diverse as an organization. And we've been saying that it's important for quite a while, to be honest, and not making a great deal of progress. What we need to do is start putting actual resources into it. Have people whose day job it is, not in their spare time, to coordinate that what we are doing goes in the right direction and that our efforts promote diversity and equity in an effective way. We've been looking at the metrics over the last few months. It's not looking great. I could check the numbers. I think we have about 20% women in the staff in Neutron Sciences. We have a way lower percentage of underrepresented minorities than that. And the numbers are going up, but they're going up at a rate which means we'll reach the level that we would like in 100 years or something. It's just not good enough. We need to get serious about this and actually put in resources and put in a real action plan. It's actually something that we've been working towards, but I think it's only just kind of a concrete plan has only really just been emerging over the last month or two, to be honest.
Well, at NIST, I don't know that our numbers are all that much better in terms of the demographics on staffing, but it's something that we have been doing some specific targeted efforts. So we have a partnership with the National Science Foundation called the Center for High Resolution Neutron Scattering, and our education and outreach efforts actually stem from the CHRNS partnership. And there's several ways that we do that. One of those is through partnerships with universities for promoting research partnerships with universities that have underrepresented populations in them, and we've got several of those in place and also in play. But Ken's right, the one thing that's more in our span of control is the staffing. And, our demographics aren't great. We are up over, somewhat over 20% in terms of female, but in certainly a lot lower when it comes to underrepresented minorities. But so those targeted efforts really matter when it comes to trying to build up the pipeline. But the other thing, which is more within my span of control, is trying to make the NCNR as welcoming a place as possible for potential staff members. So when users come here, I want them to experience this as a welcoming place. I want everybody who works here and comes to the NCNR to feel that they are treated with dignity and respect. They're valued for their uniqueness, and that they belong. And I think those three things are key to any organization, any place that you go. And recently, I have set up an informal working group within NCNR to take a look at what can we do better, because you know, you're looking at two white middle-aged males right now. You're talking to two white middle-aged males as the directors of these major facilities. And you'd be right saying, you know, what do you know about this? And so that's right. That's the right question. What do you know about this? And we need to be making these places more welcoming. We need to be listening to the right voices on these things. So I don't have an answer, but I'm trying to talk to the right people about getting the answer to make it more welcoming here.
That's very encouraging to hear.
I mean, I do see that there is kind of preliminary progress being made. I mean, preliminary in the sense that it's not yet impacting on the actual numbers. You know, we're talking about it, right? That's an important step. This is a normal conversation to be having. And I must admit, where the places I've worked before I moved here last year, this would not have been a normal conversation to have. It's a very it's an area that we all agree that we need to improve on, and it's and the question is how, not and you know, rather than is it a problem and do we need to do something about it, right? So we moved on to the right stage. I'm impatient to actually start seeing some results, but there's many areas that we need to be working on, right? I mean, there's the recruitment issue, and we hit the issue that a lot of the time when you advertise a position and it's very difficult to get a reasonable level of diversity among the candidate pool for a position in a scientific or technical field. So you have to work on that area. And then the people that you have on board, you need to retain them. You need to give them a good career path. We're going through succession planning right now in my organization, where we are, you know, anybody in a management position at any level has to think about, you know, what would happen if I fell under a bus, or if I decided to go somewhere else for a different opportunity. Who would replace me? And you know, you can build in diversity into that aspect. You know, are there diverse people around in your organization who could replace you? And maybe they're not ready to replace you now, but if, you know, given the right training opportunities and being told that, you know, you are a high potential individual that we would like to retain, perhaps one day promote, then you would do a better job of keeping people in the organization who have a good level of potential. There's a training aspect, right? We need to make it clear that aspects of conscious bias are not tolerated, and that we all have unconscious bias, and that we need to learn that and learn how to deal with that. Both you know, all of us we all have unconscious bias, right? And recognize that it's happening and learn how to do better. There's a really important cultural aspect, you know, that kind of permeates many different activities, and I see, you know, it's tremendously positive that it is being recognized as something that we need to work on right now. I just want to see it actually do it.
Absolutely. I think we're all a bit impatient about it, but it's slowly happening. One thing that keeps coming up is that to really aid these diversity efforts, a big part about it is getting people in the door so they can see these facilities. And looking at the facilities outages for the next several years, there's a decent amount of downtime. How do you see this affecting neutron science in the United States, even just with our diversity efforts, or in general?
I mean, Rob and I exchange information regularly on all aspects of our jobs, and one of the things we talk about is our coming plans for outages, right? That we have plans for facility outages both at SNS and at HIFA. We obviously coordinate those with each other. I'm aware of the outage plans at NCNR, both unplanned and planned, and we do our best to work to make sure that those kind of coincide with each other in the right way, so as to minimize the impact on the user program.
Yeah, I think so. Ken and I have been discussing, and I was discussing with his predecessor, Paul Langen, our upcoming scheduled outage for 2023. And they have the beryllium reflector replacement at HIFER also coming up in the future. And so we wanted to do the best that we could to avoid that. But here's where we really see the fact that the U.S. scientific community is underserved by the neutron sources in the U.S. Currently, you know that NIST our reactor is shut down because of an unplanned event from February, and that's having a significant impact on the user community. Because frankly, beyond the defense and national security mission work of the neutron source at Los Alamos, Oak Ridge and NIST are the major neutron facilities in the U.S. And you could look at what the numbers are. It's we're about 40% of the scientific productivity at NIST, and having that loss to the community is big. And in 2023, it's going to be the same thing because the NCNR will be shut down. That's going to be shut down for a very good reason. We're upgrading our cold neutron source, so we're going to get a factor of 2 in cold flux, as well as guide upgrades and instrument performance upgrades and things like that. So that's a big benefit to the user community. It's a big win for them. But still, you're right. It's a loss of beam time during that time. It's a loss of support. And one of the things during this unplanned outage that we have been working hard to do is, and I'm speaking primarily of our instrument scientists, is reaching out to the user community in trying to mitigate the impact of this unplanned outage. And so there's only so much that we can do, because even while NCNR, HIFER, and SNS were operating at the same time, they're oversubscribed by a factor of 2 to 3. So the demand far exceeds the supply. So that's what I meant when I said that, we're underserving the U.S. scientific community because we simply can't meet the demand for the beam time. But I have been talking with Ken about how Oak Ridge has been able to support our users while we're shut down. We've also reached out and had support from other facilities around the world. And they've been doing everything they can. They've been doing the best that they can to help. But when they're booked, there's only so much that they can do. So there's a lot of experiments that simply aren't going to get done. So that's how I see the impact on the user community. But there's also the outreach aspect, as you said. But there's no reason why we can't enhance. You can't be doing other outreach efforts while you're shut down to do those activities that are facility improvements.
Yeah, we also have facility improvement outages coming up in the next few years. We recently published a 5-year forward-looking schedule on our website to make it easier for users to plan around those. We have a long outage for the proton power upgrade at SNS, which unfortunately coincides pretty closely with the NCNR planned outage for the cold source upgrade. But we will be operating HIFER as many cycles as we possibly can during that time. you know, it's tricky because these outages, you know, we plan them a long time in advance, and we try and coordinate them with each other, and then, you know, unplanned things happen, and what looked like a well-coordinated plan no longer looks so well coordinated, and you have to adapt, and that's a continuing work in progress.
So you both mentioned communicating with each other on a pretty regular basis. One thing that always stuck out to me was that NCNR falls under the Department of Commerce, and the SNS and Hyper are much more DOE. How does this make your jobs different? As directors of these facilities under these two umbrellas, like how are they different? How are they similar?
Well, I mean, the first obvious difference is that I'm a federal employee, and that's different from the staff at Oak Ridge. And I'm tied into our laboratory organization has different disciplines, different laboratories organized by discipline, and NCNR is just one of those laboratories. That's where we're similar because there are different units within Oak Ridge. For all intents and purposes, we operate very similarly with a peer-reviewed proposal process providing the bulk of the access. Our mission at NIST is different from that of the Department of Energy. And so that means there's a couple things associated with that. One is there's overlap in the kind of basic science that's done here through the peer review proposal process. But we also have as part of our mission to serve industry and do industrially relevant research here. So we have different mechanisms for that. And probably not as familiar to the neutron scattering community at large is we use neutron scattering for developing standard reference materials and doing calibrations. So there is some difference in that. That's not necessarily tied to us being a federal laboratory versus a government-owned contractor-operated laboratory, but just a difference in the two neutron facilities, because there is a difference between being run out of the Department of Commerce and run out of the Department of Energy.
I'm glad you leapt in there and answered the question before me, Rob, because I'm much less clear on the differences here. You know, I've been in this job about 5 months. I'm still very much learning the environment that I'm in. You know, I'm a neutron expert. You know, ask me anything about neutrons, but ask me about DOE. I'm a little bit hazier. Still, that's still very much a learning environment. I mean, what I can see is that we have to respond to DOE priorities, right? So there are a number of basic research needs which are identified by DOE, you know, things like being impactful in energy materials and quantum materials and things like that. And we have to respond to that, and we have to provide the means to make progress in those areas. So we're kind of from the top down, given directions on which scientific areas are important that we address. But I think at the working level, as Rob said, you know, being a user at either NCNR or Oak Ridge, or being an instrument scientist at either place, it looks pretty similar.
So this makes me ask, though, what does a director do in a day? So on I guess what I'd call an average, I don't know if you guys have average days, but what would your average day look like?
I know my staff who are on this call are just dying for me to answer this. They want to know what it is, Rob, that you actually do during a day. Okay, you mind if I go first, Ken, yeah, so I can get this out of the way? All right, so you are actually catching us at a very unusual and unique time, given that we are in the process of recovering from a pretty significant incident that happened in February that we've remained shut down since then. And so my daily activities are centered almost entirely around that. and this is different from what it typically is. So that involves me interacting with upper levels of NIST management, determining the resources that are needed for our recovery from this incident, planning for implementation of corrective actions so that we can prevent recurrence of this from happening, and generally being an accessible resource for all of the staff within reactor operations and engineering. It's been a very intense tempo since February 3rd when the incident happened. But it has also been very gratifying because of all the progress that we've been making. So you ask a straightforward question of me in a very interesting time. And so ask me in a year and you'll probably be getting a very different answer.
So I've been investing a lot of time in learning about my organization. You may or may not have heard that Oak Ridge went through a fairly major reorganization last year called Reimagining ORNL. One of the things that was implemented there is that every unit of organization, that the group is the smallest unit of organization now in the lab, is being asked to evaluate their own performance and compare it to the performance of an elite peer, which they can choose in the community, right? And so each group leader, with help from the staff in their group, is going through the exercise of doing these group health assessments. And they present the result to me when it's ready. And each one takes about 2 hours. There's something like 50 groups in my organization covering, accelerator, neutron technologies, and SNS and HIFA science. And I have 5 or 6 of these group health assessments every week. They take up a huge amount of time. But it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's the most perfect timing coincidence. I've just started in this job and the groups are being asked to do this anyway. So I've kind of subverted the process a bit by asking them to put an equal amount of effort into describing what the group actually does for my education. And that's being tremendously valuable. So I do that. Right now, what we're trying to do actually is develop a forward-looking budget and operational plan with a five-year scope, so that we know what we can and what we can't afford, and that we can coordinate between HIFA and SNS, and we can coordinate the message that we are sending to DOE, who has to pay the bills, about we would like to do this, which means that we need these resources. That's taking up quite a lot of my time right now. Let's see what else. We had the user group meeting last week. That took up quite a lot of my time. I imagine a lot of people on this call took part in that. And then whenever I get the time, which is not as much as I would like, I like to walk around and talk to people, users on the instrument. Not so many of those these days, unfortunately. But the essays, the instrument scientists, the staff in the halls, to hear how things are going and to kind of keep in touch with how things are on a daily basis.
So are these the jobs that you always imagined having, or is it a little bit different than what you saw yourself doing when you were, say, getting your PhD?
That's a good question. When I first got into neutron scattering as a job, it was, like I mentioned, it was an instrument scientist here at NCNR, and like I described it before, that was a dream job for me because I really liked the whole idea and loved working with users on their experiments, on their research, anything that I could do to make them successful. In fact, when I asked Dan Newman about the job description when he first posed it to me, he said that basically the job is to make the user successful, and that was great. And that was my first taste, really, of serving other scientists. I love that. And so looking back on the time that I've been at NIST since then and the different jobs that I've had as I've moved through this organization, each one of those had a different degree of serving other scientists. And each one was an even better job than the last one, as far as I was concerned. And so now the way I view my job as director of NCNR is it's the ultimate dream job because I get to serve scientists on different levels. First of all, there's the Neutron user community, and then there's also the scientific staff and all of the technical staff and support folks who work at the NCNR, who are the ones providing that service to the users. I don't know that I knew what that sort of a job was going to be like way back when, but it doesn't matter to me because it's, in some sense, the job is also what you make it, and it's a service job, and I love it.
I feel that it's similar to that. I mean, every time I've moved from one position to the next, I've thought, oh wow, this is my dream job, you know. But my previous job was also my dream job. You know, if I was to tell you which job I've enjoyed the most, actually, is probably when I was an instrument scientist in D7. The level of kind of freedom and fun that you had, just playing around with the instrument, working with users, doing experiments, coding better data reduction software, whatever. That was probably the most fun I had, and I imagine it was kind of fun in the way that you look back on your youth and say, oh, that was a carefree time. It was. I love that. But at the same time, when I moved on from that, I moved on to become group leader for the Neutron Optics group at the ILL. That was also a dream job, developing instrumentation and being responsible for doing it in a group so that they're doing so much more than I could do myself, as an individual contributor. And then moving on from there to being able to just provide so much more because I'm working with so many more people than I could as an individual. That feels really good. I feel I make a difference. I guess that's the payoff of this.
No, absolutely. And one thing I wanted to hit on was that I work with a lot of students, and one of the topics that always comes up really is imposter syndrome. And my question for you guys is, have you faced imposter syndrome? And if you have, does it ever go away?
Absolutely. Well, do I feel imposter syndrome? Absolutely. Am I the best person for this job? Probably not. Right? I could imagine. Well, the thing is, I am in this job, right? So it's my job to do it and to do it to the best of my ability. If someone else was in my job and somebody else was in my job until quite recently and somebody else will be in my job one day in the future, will they be doing it better than me? Very possibly. They would certainly be doing it differently to what I do. So, it's the standard kind of job interview question, why are you the best candidate for this job? Well, I don't think anybody can say that you are the best candidate for the job. You can only say, well, what you would make of the job. I have no doubt there's somebody out there who would do the job better than me, but I happen to have the job right now and I'm going to make the most of it.
Yeah, ditto. Well, I think with every new position that I've had, or different position, since I've worked at NIST, I've had that at least for the beginning of it. I think it's just human nature. You're getting into something where you feel like there's somebody who knows so much more about that job than you. Like, for example, when I became an instrument scientist, it was clear to me that there were many more people around the world who knew much more about neutron backscattering than I did. But it was also a big confidence builder after I had been in that position for a while, because I became more knowledgeable about how that instrument operated than most other people. And that's sort of how it works, or how I found it worked with me too. So yeah, I mean, I had a job a detail where I work downtown for the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House. So that's working, you know, for the President's Science Advisor. And talk about having imposter syndrome. You know, I'm a relatively new to NIST. I get this gig working down there, and that was both terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. And then, you know, when I ended up becoming acting director of the NCNR, I think I had imposter syndrome for probably about a year or so, just because, you know, it's, you know what the job is, you're learning what the job is about, and it takes you a while to get your arms wrapped around what that is. So I think it's just human nature, and I would be surprised for people who don't have that imposter syndrome when they're just starting out on a new endeavor.
That makes me feel better, Rob. You know, I used to think that I was pretty smart. You know, when I was at school, I thought, yeah, you know, I'm the cleverest guy in this room. I know what I'm doing. I've met so many people who are smarter than I am. You know, and you know, pretty early on, and you know, you learn. Doesn't matter how clever you are, there are cleverer people out there. And you kind of see yourself in the context of what other people are able to do and what you are able to do. And you kind of try and work out, well, how can I best contribute to this? You know, it's not a competition about, you know, who is cleverest or who is most powerful or whatever. It's about being able to do your bit to move the whole endeavor forward in some way. And I really feel that we're working for the good cause.
I can't imagine you could get into a position like either of yours without having some kind of vision for how you see neutron sciences. Imposter syndrome aside, it's what kind of, if you had an unlimited budget and you could just do anything you wanted with neutrons, what would you do?
More instruments. I mean, you know, you gotta, that's one. There's many things. I'm sure Ken is going to have some too, but you know, the question that I try and ask myself just from an NCNR perspective, but also I think it's a general question that all facilities try and ask is, how can we best provide neutron measurements for the scientific community? And there's a number of different ways that you can do that. It is enhancing your sources, making the absolute best use of the sources that you have. You can look at the upgrades that Oak Ridge has planned. That's what we're doing. We have a limited budget, but we're able to replace our cold source to get improvements. But one of the areas that the US has fallen behind in is in neutron capacity. It's not just capability. Oak Ridge has some beautiful instruments. They're very high performing. We have world-class high performing instruments, but there's also the capacity aspect, not just capability. And we are dwarfed by European neutron sources, by the Asia-Oceania region. You know, we haven't, I think it's been over 20 years since we had a peak of the number of neutron instruments, neutron capacity in the US. And so that's really an area where we have not only made dramatic improvements in neutron instrumentation from an optimization perspective, neutron optics, count rate in detector being one of the most important measures. But because of that, we can really exploit these sources by fully instrumenting all of them. But then you have to start thinking about new neutron sources, because there's only so much that Oak Ridge is going to be able to build around HIFER, around FTS and STS, and we only have so much real estate on our current reactor. So we also need to be thinking about the long-term vision, and that's looking like 50 years out. And so that's an area where I think the agencies need to start working together at a pretty high level in mapping out what that future looks like. And that will necessarily include agencies like the DOE and Department of Commerce, but also the National Science Foundation as well, because they all have equities in neutron science in the US. So we've been taking a long look at what a new reactor source would look like at NIST. We're in the very early stages of this. We fully intend to relicense this reactor when the current license expires in 2029. There's no life-limiting issues that we're aware of with the reactor, but we want to plan for the future to make sure that the U.S. has a very reliable neutron source and lots of great instruments to serve the user community into the future.
Yeah, I completely agree, Rob. We have to be able to address both the capacity and the capability aspects. And it's not something which one facility can do. It has to come. It has to be a multi-pronged attack. I mean, looking at what I would like to see Oak Ridge move into. I mean, we have the second target station project, which is moving forward really well, and that's really exciting. That is going to set a new level kind of worldwide for performance. But that really addresses the capability argument, right? It's a relatively small number of instruments, and it's a relatively long way away. The capacity argument requires looking beyond Oak Ridge and NIST. Actually, we have a number of neutron facilities which have closed down in North America. It's the same in Europe over the last 10, 15 years. We have some catching up to do in terms of capacity. And that's just to get back to where we were back then. And I would like to see it get back better than where we were in the past. I'm very pleased to see that there is activity going on in Canada to start up new capabilities to compensate for the loss of the Chalk River reactor. We're hoping at Haifa to renew to replace the pressure vessel of the reactor, and that's something which has been holding back the capacity of Haifa for increasing the number of instruments. If we replace the pressure vessel at Haifa, we could actually change some of the beam tubes and allow a very large beam tube to feed a new guide hole. And we could add 10 new instruments in the thermal guide hole. That would be phenomenal. That would both be kind of world leading in capability and really help address the capacity problem.
So we are coming to the end of our hour. So I want to end with a happy question, or what I perceive as a happy question. What advice would you give to yourself as a young scientist?
I would say, do what you love doing. Don't worry too much about the future. Just find the thing which really gets you excited right now and do that. It will lead to something good.
And along those similar lines, try as many different things as you are able to, explore the possibilities. Because in my career, I found some things that I really liked, some things that I was so at, but the things that I really liked and that I was really good at, those are the things that made the difference. So very similar to Ken.
Yeah, kind of recognize what you're good at, and I mean, what you're good at and what you enjoy doing, they are ideally the same thing, right? They often are, right? So make the most of that. Make the most of your own strengths.
Okay, so that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank you both, Ken and Rob. It's been a pleasure to spend the past hour chatting with you about your own experiences, directing your vision. We pretty much went all over the place. Your vision for neutrons, and it really has been humbling for me to be able to sit down and talk to people like yourselves who shape the direction of neutron scattering. So for everybody else here, if you enjoyed what you saw today and have thoughts or ideas for speakers for the next NSSA Neutron Café, DM us through our Facebook page, our Twitter at Neutrons America. So with that, until next time, hopefully we'll see everyone here soon.
Thank you. This was fun.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Claire. Really enjoyed it.
Bye.